When a devoted husband discovers his wife's shocking affair, his world crumbles. Fueled by rage and betrayal, he devises a meticulous plan to strip her of everything she holds dear, her comfort, her pride, her lover. But as his cold, calculated revenge unfolds, he begins to question whether reclaiming his power is worth the cost. What starts as a quest for justice spirals into a tragic collision of broken trust, raw emotions, and unintended consequences. In the end, both are left shattered in ways neither could have imagined. How far is too far when seeking revenge? It's strange how the cracks in a marriage can go unnoticed for so long, until they suddenly become chasms too wide to cross. For 10 years, I thought Emily and I were solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs like anyone else, but we were a team. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, there were signs, small things I ignored, moments I brushed off because I was too busy or too blind to see them for what they really were. I worked hard to build the life we had. My company wasn't handed to me on a silver platter. I earned every penny through sleepless nights, stressful meetings, and constant pressure. Emily always said she admired that about me, how driven I was. She said it made her feel safe, like she didn't have to worry about anything because I'd always take care of her. And I did. I took care of her every step of the way, from the day we said, I do. We weren't rich when we first got married, but over the years, my hard work paid off. We moved into a beautiful 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, complete with a pool and a massive backyard Emily loved to decorate for parties. I bought her a new car when hers broke down, paid off her student loans, and even surprised her with a trip to Italy for our 5th anniversary. She used to tell me I spoiled her, but I liked doing it. Seeing her smile, knowing I was the one who put it there, that was enough for me. But somewhere along the way, something changed. It started small, almost unnoticeable. Emily became quieter, more distant. She'd sit across from me at dinner, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I talked about my day. I thought maybe she was stressed. She'd mentioned feeling restless, like she didn't know what to do with herself now that she wasn't working. She quit her job 3 years ago, saying she wanted to focus on herself and figure out what made her happy. I supported her decision, of course. I told her not to worry about the bills, that I'd handle it. For a while, she seemed fine. She took up yoga, joined a book club, even started painting. But then the hobbies stopped, one by one, and she started spending more time out with friends, or so she said. The first real red flag came on a Friday night. Emily told me she was meeting her friend Sarah for drinks, something they used to do once or twice a month. I didn't think much of it at first. I kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun, and settled in for a quiet night at home. But when I woke up the next morning and saw her side of the bed still empty, my chest tightened. She didn't come home. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted her, asking if she was okay, but got no response. Finally, around 9 a.m., she walked through the door, her hair messy and her makeup smudged. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She yawned, dropping her purse on the counter like nothing was wrong. "At Sarah's. We had a few too many drinks, so I crashed on her couch. I didn't want to drive home drunk." It made sense. It was responsible, even. But something about her tone, her body language, didn't sit right with me. "You could have called," I said, watching her closely. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she replied, brushing past me to head upstairs. That should have been the moment I pushed harder, asked more questions. But I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. She was my wife. Why would she lie to me? Over the next few weeks, though, the uneasiness in my gut didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. Emily started going out more often, girls' nights, lunches, errands that seemed to take hours. She was glued to her phone, always smiling at texts she never showed me. And then there was the new password. Emily had never been secretive about her phone before. She used to leave it lying around the house without a care. But one day, I picked it up to hand it to her, and the screen was locked. "When did you start using a password?" I asked casually. She shrugged, not even looking up. "I don't know. Just felt like it." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. Still, I let it go. I wanted to trust her. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who started fights over nothing. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The turning point came when I overheard her talking on the phone late one night. I'd gotten up to grab a glass of water and heard her voice coming from the guest bathroom. She was whispering, her tone soft and different. "No, I can't," she said. "He's still awake." My blood ran cold. She hung up before I could hear more, and when she came out of the bathroom, she froze, clearly startled to see me standing there. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah," she said quickly, brushing past me. She needed advice about something. "Why were you whispering?" She glanced back at me, her eyes narrowing. "Are you seriously interrogating me right now?" "It was a private conversation." "Is that not allowed anymore?" Her defensiveness caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. Before I could say anything else, she stormed off to bed. That was the moment I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was going on, it wasn't innocent. I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of betraying me, but the evidence was piling up, and I couldn't keep looking the other way. I spent the next few days in a haze, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she bored? Unhappy? Did I do something to push her away? Part of me wanted to confront her again, but I knew it wouldn't get me anywhere. She'd just lie, deflect, make me feel like I was the problem. So, I did the only thing I could think of, I hired a private investigator. I felt sick to my stomach making the call, like I was admitting to myself that my marriage was already over. But I needed the truth. If Emily was cheating, I couldn't stay in the dark anymore. I deserved to know. The PI, a guy named Dan, was professional and discreet. He assured me he'd get to the bottom of it quickly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, not hope that my suspicions were wrong, but hope that I'd finally have clarity. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, Dan called me and said he had everything I needed. When I met him at his office, he handed me a manila folder, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, man," he said quietly. I opened the folder, my hands trembling. Inside were photos of Emily and another man, laughing together at a cafe, holding hands as they walked down the street. The final photo, the one that made my stomach churn, was of them kissing in the backyard of my vacation home, the one I'd bought for us. The man in the photos was Luke, the contractor I'd hired to renovate that very house. I'd trusted him, paid him generously, even invited him over for beers after work. And now he was sleeping with my wife. I stared at the photos for what felt like hours, my mind blank except for a single thought: she betrayed me. When I finally looked up at Dan, I said the only thing I could think of. "What do I do now?" Dan gave me a sympathetic smile. "That's up to you. But whatever you decide, make sure it's on your terms. Don't let her control the narrative." I nodded, my jaw clenched. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain: Emily and Luke weren't going to get away with this. Not by a long shot. When I got home that night, I sat in the car for a long time, just staring at the house. Our house. The lights were on in the living room, and I could see Emily moving around inside, her silhouette dancing through the curtains. My wife. The woman I had promised to love, honor, and cherish. And yet, all I could feel in that moment was anger, hot, blistering anger. She had no idea I knew. She had no idea her perfect little lie was unraveling. I could confront her right then and there. March inside, throw the photos on the coffee table, and demand answers. But what would that accomplish? She'd cry, apologize, make excuses, and maybe even try to spin it around on me. No. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. I needed to be smart, calculated. This wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about how I was going to take control of the situation. How I was going to make sure she felt the weight of every lie she told, every choice she made. When I finally stepped inside, Emily greeted me like nothing was wrong. She was sitting on the couch, her laptop open, probably shopping for something I'd end up paying for. "Hey," she said, flashing me a smile. "You're home late. Long day at work?" I nodded, forcing a neutral expression. "Yeah. Busy day." She closed her laptop and stretched. "I was thinking we could order in tonight. I don't feel like cooking." Typical Emily. Always looking for the easy way out. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone even. "Whatever you want." She didn't notice the way I was watching her, studying her every move. She didn't notice the tension in my voice, or the way my fists clenched at my sides. I sat down across from her, pretending to scroll through my phone while my mind raced. This was the woman I'd built my life around, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. And yet, here she was, lying to my face, carrying on like nothing had changed. I couldn't decide if I was more disgusted with her or myself, for letting it get to this point, for not seeing it sooner. Over the next few days, I started putting my plan into motion. The first step was to protect myself financially. Emily didn't have a job, and everything we owned, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, was tied to me. I'd always seen that as a way of taking care of her, but now I realized it was my greatest advantage. I called my lawyer, Mark, and told him everything. I didn't hold back: the affair, the photos, the sleepless nights wondering how long this had been going on. Mark was sympathetic, but he didn't sugarcoat things. "You're in a strong position," he said. "But you need to act fast. If she gets wind of this before you're ready, she could start making claims, trying to bleed you dry in a divorce settlement." I nodded, gripping the phone tightly. "What do I need to do?" "First, move your money. Any joint accounts need to be separated immediately. Keep records of everything, every transaction, every dollar spent. And don't confront her yet. Not until we've got all the legal groundwork in place." It was sound advice, and I followed it to the letter. I opened a new bank account in my name only and transferred most of our savings into it. I made sure to leave just enough in the joint account so Emily wouldn't get suspicious, but not enough for her to do any real damage. Next, I stopped the automatic payments on her credit cards. Emily loved to shop: designer bags, expensive shoes, lavish beauty treatments. She never thought twice about swiping the card because she knew I'd take care of the bill. Not anymore. Then there was the house. I double-checked the deed, making sure it was solely in my name, and started looking into what it would take to get her out of there once the divorce was underway. Mark assured me it wouldn't be difficult, given the circumstances. Meanwhile, I kept up the facade at home. I played the part of the clueless husband, pretending I didn't notice the late-night phone calls or the girls' nights that seemed to happen more and more frequently. Every time she left the house, I'd wait a few minutes before calling Dan, letting him know to follow her. The more evidence I gathered, the angrier I became. Emily and Luke weren't just having an affair, they were flaunting it. Meeting at fancy restaurants, spending weekends together at the vacation house, acting like they didn't have a care in the world. It was disgusting. But the worst part? The absolute gut punch. Seeing her laugh with him in the photos. That carefree, radiant smile she used to save for me was now directed at someone else. Someone who hadn't sacrificed for her, who hadn't built a life with her. Someone who was only there because it was convenient. I wanted to confront her so badly, to scream at her, to demand answers. But I knew that wasn't the way to win. Confrontation wouldn't give me closure, it would just give her a chance to twist the knife deeper. So, I waited. And I planned. One night, while Emily was out running errands, I took a walk through the house. Our house. Every room held memories, some good, some bad, but now, all I could see were the lies. The kitchen where we used to cook together, the dining table where we'd celebrated anniversaries, the living room where we'd spent lazy Sundays watching movies. It was all tainted now. I walked into the bedroom and stood in front of the closet. Emily's side was overflowing with designer clothes and shoes, most of which she'd bought with my money. I opened the drawer where she kept her jewelry and stared at the collection of necklaces, bracelets, and rings I'd given her over the years. Each piece represented a moment, birthdays, holidays, milestones. And now, they were nothing more than reminders of my misplaced trust. I closed the drawer and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. I wanted to feel sad, to mourn the loss of the woman I thought I married. But all I felt was anger, pure, unrelenting anger. Emily had no idea what was coming. She thought she was in control, that she could have her cake and eat it too. But she was wrong. I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to make sure she lost everything. Emily's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. She had chosen to play me for a fool, using the life I built for her as the backdrop for her deceit. And while I'd spent weeks setting up the chessboard in silence, calculating every move to protect myself, I realized that winning wasn't just about walking away. It was about making her understand the weight of what she'd done. As the days passed, I continued to act like nothing had changed. I went to work, smiled when necessary, and even kissed her goodbye every morning. Meanwhile, my lawyer finalized everything in the background. The divorce papers were drafted. The assets were secured. And Emily? She was completely oblivious, still living in her fantasy world, thinking she'd gotten away with it. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted her to feel the consequences, to experience firsthand what it was like to lose everything she'd taken for granted. The first part of my plan involved Luke. Dan, my private investigator, had done some digging into him while following Emily, and what he found was almost laughable. Luke was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, unpaid loans, and a failed business venture that had left him barely scraping by. The contractor gig he'd taken for our vacation home was probably the best-paying job he'd had in years. I smiled to myself when Dan handed me the report. If Emily thought Luke was her ticket to excitement and wealth, she was in for a rude awakening. It was time to test the waters. One evening, when Emily left for one of her girls' nights, I drove to the vacation house. It was a 3-hour drive, but I didn't mind. I needed to see it for myself. When I arrived, the house looked exactly how I left it, immaculate, picturesque, a dream property. But as I walked through the front door, the reality of what had been happening there hit me like a punch to the gut. The living room smelled faintly of her perfume, the same scent she wore when we first met. A bottle of wine sat half empty on the kitchen counter, and there were 2 glasses in the sink. I walked upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet, and opened the door to the master bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets twisted and crumpled. I stared at it for a long moment, a cocktail of emotions swirling inside me, anger, humiliation, disgust. But instead of letting those feelings consume me, I focused on my goal. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every room, every detail. I wanted evidence, not just for the divorce, but for myself. A reminder of why I was doing this. Before I left, I made one small change. I opened Emily's nightstand drawer and slipped a voice recorder inside. It was a long shot, but if she and Luke continued to use this place as their getaway, I might pick up something useful. When I got back home, Emily was already asleep, curled up on her side of the bed as if nothing was wrong. I climbed in next to her, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had transpired in that house. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone. I'd been careful not to push too hard about her sudden decision to password protect it, but after weeks of observing her habits, I'd figured it out. 4 digits, the month and day of our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I unlocked her phone and quickly navigated to her messages. There they were, texts between her and Luke. Luke, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Emily, me too. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it to be with you. Luke, soon, we won't have to. He's so clueless. You're amazing for putting up with him this long. Clueless. That word hit me harder than I expected. I took screenshots of everything and forwarded them to myself before carefully putting the phone back where I found it. When Emily came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she gave me one of her fake smiles. You're up early, she said. Yeah, couldn't sleep, I replied, keeping my tone casual. She didn't press further. She never did anymore. By now, my plan was fully in motion. The finances were locked down, the evidence was piling up, and the divorce papers were ready. But I wasn't finished. Emily had humiliated me, made me the punchline of some inside joke she shared with her lover. And while taking her to court would hurt her financially, it wouldn't deliver the full impact I wanted. I needed to hit her where it hurt most, her pride, her sense of control. That's when I decided to let her see the cracks forming beneath her perfect world. The first domino fell when her credit card was declined at the salon. She called me, irritated but trying to sound casual. Hey, my card isn't working for some reason. Can you take a look? I feigned confusion. That's strange. I'll check with the bank. In the meantime, just use the joint account. Okay, she said, her tone clipped. I could hear the frustration in her voice, but she didn't press me. Not yet. A few days later, she tried to book a weekend trip with Sarah, at least, that's what she claimed, but her hotel reservation was cancelled. This time, she didn't call me. Instead, she sulked around the house, snapping at me over minor things, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. I stayed calm, acted clueless. Everything okay? I asked one evening, noticing the furrowed brow as she stared at her laptop. Yeah, fine, she muttered, closing it quickly. Her world was starting to crack, and I could see the panic setting in. But the real blow came a week later when I finally confronted Luke, not in person, but through his business. Luke's contracting business was already on the verge of collapse. All it took was a few phone calls to some of my well-connected friends to make sure he wouldn't be getting any more work in the area. Contractors live on reputation, and once word got out that Luke was unreliable, his client list dried up overnight. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach Emily. One night, while she thought I was asleep, I overheard her arguing with Luke on the phone. What do you mean you lost the job? She hissed. I thought you said this was a sure thing. Luke's response was muffled, but I didn't need to hear the details. I knew exactly what was happening. Over the next few days, Emily grew more withdrawn. She wasn't smiling at her phone anymore, wasn't sneaking off as often. Whatever fantasy she'd built with Luke was crumbling, and she had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. But I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my plan was the vacation house, the place where she and Luke had carried out their affair. It was time to make sure they could never use it again. I listed the property for sale. It was a quick, quiet transaction, and within a month, it was gone. When Emily found out, she was livid. You sold the vacation house without telling me, she yelled, her face red with anger. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. It didn't make sense to keep it. We weren't using it, and the market's good right now. Figured it was the smart move. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, might let her mask slip. But instead, she stormed out of the room. She was unraveling, just like I planned. But the real fireworks were yet to come. Emily's world was unraveling exactly as I'd intended, but with every calculated move, every small victory, a strange heaviness began to settle over me. At first, I brushed it off as exhaustion. Revenge is work, after all, and I'd devoted every waking moment to ensuring she suffered the consequences of her betrayal. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling creeping into my chest, an emptiness that refused to be filled, even as I tore her life apart piece by piece. The divorce papers were ready to go. I had the evidence, the legal framework, the advantage in every conceivable way. Emily had no idea what was coming. But the thrill I'd felt at the start of my plan, the righteous anger, the sense of taking control, had dulled into something I couldn't quite define. I should have felt vindicated. But instead, all I could think about was how quiet the house had become. How Emily's laughter, even if it was fake, had once filled the air. How the life we built, however flawed, was now a hollow shell of what it used to be. One evening, as I was sitting alone in the living room, Emily came home. She didn't greet me. She barely even looked at me. She just dropped her purse on the counter and disappeared upstairs without a word. This wasn't unusual lately. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it was short, clipped, and tense. But something about her silence that night felt different. It was heavier. The next morning, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. Again, nothing unusual, she'd been staying out late, sleeping in the guest room some nights. I got up, made coffee, and went about my routine. It wasn't until hours later, when I walked past the guest room, that I realized something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see her lying on the bed, still in the clothes she'd worn the night before. At first, I thought she was asleep. But then I noticed the empty pill bottle on the nightstand. My heart stopped. "Emily!" I yelled, rushing into the room. I shook her, my hands trembling. "Emily, wake up!" She didn't move. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone and called 911, barely able to get the words out as I told them what had happened. The paramedics arrived quickly, but the minutes felt like hours. I stood in the hallway as they worked on her, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had we gone from a happy, loving couple to this? When one of the paramedics finally came out of the room, his expression was grim. "She's alive," he said, but his tone was cautious. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately. It looks like she took a dangerous amount of sleeping pills." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The next few hours were a blur. I sat in the hospital waiting room, staring at the floor, replaying every moment of the last few months in my head. The lies, the betrayal, the anger, it all seemed so distant now, overshadowed by the image of her lying motionless on the bed. Finally, a doctor came out to speak to me. "She's stable," he said. "But she's not out of the woods yet. We'll need to monitor her closely over the next 24 hours. Can I see her?" I asked. He hesitated. "She's conscious, but she's very fragile. Emotionally and physically. If you go in, try to keep things calm." I nodded and followed him down the hall to her room. When I walked in, Emily was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes flickered to me, and for the first time in months, I saw something in them I hadn't seen before, raw vulnerability. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I swallowed hard, pulling a chair up to her bedside. "Because I had to be." She looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "You hate me." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Did I hate her? I thought I had. I thought the betrayal had erased every ounce of love I'd ever felt for her. But sitting there, seeing her like that, I realized the truth was far more complicated. "I'm angry," I admitted. Angry at what you did. Angry at how things turned out. But hate? No, Emily. I don't hate you. She let out a shaky breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. Everything's falling apart. Luke, he left. The house, the money, everything's gone. I was so stupid, and I ruined everything. Her words hit me like a freight train. She wasn't the confident, carefree woman I'd spent months resenting. She was broken. And while part of me wanted to hold on to my anger, to remind her that she'd brought this on herself, another part of me couldn't ignore the pain in her voice. I don't know how we got here, I said softly. But I know this isn't what I wanted. Not really. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. And for the first time, I believed her. Over the next few days, I stayed by her side as she recovered. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know what the future would look like. But as I sat there, holding her hand, I realized that revenge hadn't brought me the closure I thought it would. It hadn't healed the wounds or erased the pain. If anything, it had only deepened the divide between us. Emily's betrayal had broken us, but my quest for vengeance had shattered what little was left. And now, all we had were the pieces. Whether we could put them back together was a question neither of us could answer. But for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about winning or losing. I was just thinking about what it meant to be human, to hurt, to forgive, to try and make sense of the mess we'd made. And as Emily drifted off to sleep, her hand still in mine, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Something imperfect, fragile, and uncertain. But something real.